I am about to tell you to do something your owner's manual never mentions, your dealer will never recommend, and most Ram owners think is a waste of time. It takes 20 minutes once a month, and it directly prevents the $7,000 Hemi lifter failure that wrecks more Ram engines than anything else. I will get to that one in a minute, but first, there are 7 other habits your Ram truck needs to survive past 100,000 miles. Number 1, ignore your oil change reminder and change it sooner. Yeah, I know you have heard the oil change speech before, but this is about the interval, not the oil itself, and the number in your Ram owner's manual is quietly wrecking engines. The 5.7 Hemi has a 10,000 mile factory interval. The 6.7 Cummins jumped from 7,500 to 15,000 miles in 2013 for the exact same engine. Same block, same bearings, same oil capacity. Nothing changed except the marketing department wanting a better number on the window sticker. Here is what actually happens when you push that interval on a Hemi. The hydraulic roller lifters inside the engine depend on clean oil to keep the tiny rollers spinning freely on the camshaft. Dirty oil with carbon buildup causes a roller to seize, and once it does, it grinds directly against the cam lobe and wipes it flat. Metal debris floods through the oil passages, and if it reaches the oil control valve for the variable valve timing system, you are looking at a full engine replacement. I have personally pulled apart 5.7 Hemi engines with this exact failure, and every single owner told me they followed the factory schedule. The repair costs $4,000 to $8,000 depending on who does the work. Experienced Ram owners on the Ram forum and Bob is the Oil Guy forums change the Hemi every 5,000 to 6,000 miles with full synthetic, half the factory number. Cummins veterans change at 7,500 to 10,000 because fuel dilution from the diesel particulate filter regeneration cycle breaks down oil faster than it did on older trucks without emissions equipment. And while you are under the truck, drain and refill your ZF 8-speed transmission fluid every from 50,000 to 60,000 miles. The manual says lifetime fill. ZF, who actually builds it, calls that claim ridiculous. $300 in fluid versus a $4,000 rebuild. The best $30 you will ever spend on your Ram is sending an oil sample to Blackstone Labs every time you change it. They test for metalware, fuel dilution, and coolant contamination. One sample catches a developing lifter problem or a cracked EGR cooler months before you hear a single tick from under the hood. Number 2, check your coolant level every single time you fill up with gas. This one saved a customer of mine from a $5,000 repair last spring. He came in for a routine oil change on his 2016 Ram 1500 Eco Diesel and mentioned the coolant reservoir looked a little low, just a 1/4 inch. Most people would top it off and forget about it. I pulled the intake and found a cracked EGR cooler leaking vaporized coolant into the exhaust gas recirculation system. On the Eco Diesel, that hot coolant vapor can actually combust inside the plastic intake manifold. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration recalled over 107,000 of these trucks for this exact fire risk. His truck was not covered by the recall, but we caught it before the intake manifold melted. The EGR cooler repair ran about $2,000. If that intake had melted, we would have been past $6,000. On the 6.4 Hemi and the heavy-duty trucks, 2 small coolant hoses hide underneath the intake manifold where you will never see them during a normal inspection. They rot from the inside out and leak coolant onto the engine block. The hoses cost $20, but getting to them through the intake manifold costs $300 to $800 in labor. For Cummins owners, the water pump is the weak link. These fail commonly between 40,000 and 100,000 miles, and when the bearing seizes, it throws the serpentine belt at highway speed. That means you lose power steering and experience reduced braking at the same time. I always tell my Cummins customers to carry a spare belt in the toolbox behind the seat. Mark your coolant reservoir with a Sharpie line at the current level. Any drop, even a tiny one, means something is leaking inside and you need to figure out where before it becomes a four-figure disaster. Number 3. Listen for the Hemi exhaust manifold tick every cold morning. This is my least favorite repair to quote because the customer always says the same thing while I stand next to their Ram on the lift. It is just a small tick. How bad can it be? On a Hemi, the answer depends entirely on when you catch it. Every Hemi engine Ram has ever built, from 2003 through the current model year, has the same design issue. The cast iron exhaust manifold bolts into the aluminum cylinder head, and those two metals expand at completely different rates when the engine heats up and cools down. The rear cylinders near the firewall run hottest and snap bolts first. Stellantis has issued technical service bulletins for this across almost every model year, but they have never actually fixed the design. If you catch it early, a set of Remflex gaskets and upgraded stainless steel bolts costs $50 to $100 and a Saturday afternoon in the driveway. But here is where people get into trouble. They ignore that cold morning tick for 6 months, and then 3 more bolts snap. Now those broken bolts are flush inside the aluminum head and need professional extraction. That job runs $950 to $3,200 at a shop. Your monthly check takes 30 seconds. Start the engine cold and listen near both exhaust manifolds for a light puffing or ticking that fades as the Hemi warms up. That sound is exhaust gas escaping past a broken bolt. It sounds completely different from the deeper, persistent lifter tick. If you hear it, order the parts before the rest of the bolts follow, and the bill triples. Number 4. Take your Ram for a hard drive once a month. Seriously. Alright, this is the one I mentioned in the beginning. It costs $0, takes about 20 minutes, and it directly addresses the root cause of the most expensive engine failure on every Ram in the lineup. Mechanics call it the Italian tune. The idea is simple. Once a month, take your Ram on a sustained hard drive. Get on the highway, let the engine pull under real load at higher RPM for at least 20 minutes straight. No city driving, no stop and go, no babying the throttle. Here is why this matters so much on a Hemi specifically. The 5.7-liter and the 6.4-liter both use a system called multi-displacement, where the engine shuts down 4 of the 8 cylinders during light cruising to save fuel. The problem is that those 4 deactivated pistons inside the engine block cool down while the active ones stay hot, and carbon builds up unevenly on the cylinder walls and valve seats. Over time, that uneven carbon accumulation is exactly what causes the lifter rollers to stick and seize, which leads to the camshaft destruction I talked about earlier. A monthly hard drive on the highway forces all 8 cylinders to fire under full load, burns off that carbon buildup, exercises the full range of the variable valve timing system, and boils moisture out of the crankcase oil. I have talked to Ram owners on 5th-generation Ram forums, including Ram forums with well over 150,000 miles on their Hemi, who swear this is the reason their lifters are still healthy, and I believe them because the trucks I see with lifter failures almost always belong to owners who do mostly short trips and city driving, where the engine never really works hard. For Cummins owners, this monthly highway run forces a clean and complete diesel particulate filter regeneration, instead of the incomplete short trip regenerations that clog the diesel particulate filter with soot. For the Pentastar V6, it helps clear carbon from the intake valves. Every Ram engine benefits from this, and it costs you nothing but 20 minutes of driving once a month. Number 5. Replace the $25 part that saves you from a $7,000 repair. The PCV valve on the 5.7 Hemi is a cheap little part inside the valve cover that controls crankcase pressure. When it clogs up, and it will because the Hemi produces more blow-by than most engines in its class, that pressure has nowhere to go, so it forces oil past every gasket and seal it can find, including valve cover gaskets, the rear main seal, and the front crank seal. One owner on the Ram forum found his breather hose completely full of oil from a failed PCV valve. His mechanic told him another month of driving and the rear main seal would have blown, which means pulling the transmission to fix a problem that a $25 part could have prevented. I have seen this exact scenario play out at least a dozen times. A guy comes in convinced he needs valve cover gaskets because there is oil weeping down the back of the engine. I check the PCV valve first, and 9 times out of 10 that is the actual problem. A $25 fix instead of $400. For Cummins owners, the crankcase ventilation filter does the same job. The factory interval is 67,500 miles, but diesel mechanics on the Cummins forum say 30 to 50,000 miles is smarter under heavy use. When that filter clogs, oil mist goes straight into the turbocharger and coats the variable geometry vanes with carbon. That is how you end up with a seized VGT actuator, which is the most common turbo failure on the 6.7, and it runs $1,500 to $4,000 at a diesel shop. A $70 filter prevents that. If you are getting value out of this, hit subscribe. I put out new Ram maintenance content every week. Number 6. Check the Pentastar oil filter housing before it dumps your oil at highway speed. If your Ram runs the 3.6-liter Pentastar V6, this plastic oil filter housing is the engine's weakest point. It holds the filter, oil sensors, and a built-in oil cooler all in one plastic assembly. Heat cycles warp and crack the plastic over time, and when it finally lets go, it does not give you a warning light. One owner on the Dodge forum lost all his engine oil at 59,000 miles on the highway. No gradual leak, no drip in the driveway. The housing cracked and the oil came out. At every oil change, look at the back of the engine around the oil filter housing for any wet spots or oil buildup. This leak gets blamed on the rear main seal constantly because the oil runs down the back of the block. Torque the filter cap to exactly 18 foot-pounds, no more, because over-tightening cracks the plastic faster. Around 60,000 miles, swap the factory housing for a dormant aluminum replacement for between $150 and $250 at any parts store. That is a fraction of the emergency dealer repair, and the aluminum housing will outlast the engine. But if you think a cracked oil filter housing sounds expensive, wait until you hear what a clogged fuel filter does to a Ram diesel. Number 7. Change your diesel fuel filters at half the factory interval. The 3.0 EcoDiesel uses a Bosch high-pressure fuel pump that relies on fuel for lubrication and cooling. A clogged fuel filter starves that pump, and when it fails, it sends metal shrapnel through every fuel line, fuel rail, and injector on the engine. That is not a pump replacement. That is a complete fuel system overhaul costing $5,000 to $10,000. The fuel filter that prevents it costs $30 to $50. The official EcoDiesel interval is 30,000 miles. I would never let one go past 15 to 20,000. I dug into the actual Ram maintenance schedules by state and found something most EcoDiesel owners have no idea about. Several states, including Pennsylvania, New York, and Ohio, have a separate Ram maintenance schedule that calls for 10,000-mile fuel filter intervals because of regional fuel quality issues. Check your state-specific schedule because the one in your glove box might not be the right one for where you live. The 6.7 Cummins has 2 fuel filters with a 15,000-mile factory interval. Most Cummins veterans I talk to change at 10 to 12,000 miles. After every filter change, prime the system properly. Air bubbles in the high-pressure pump are a leading cause of fuel system damage on the newer trucks. Drain the water separator too. Water corrodes injector tips and breeds bacteria in the fuel tank. A full set of 6 Cummins injectors runs $3,500 to $5,000 at a dealer. $70 in filters every 10,000 miles makes that someone else's problem. Now this last one is not an engine problem, but it will leave your Ram dead in a parking lot if you ignore it. Number 8. Test your battery voltage before a dead Ram strands you somewhere you do not want to be. I would not bring this up if it was just an occasional thing, but parasitic battery drain is a problem on basically every generation of Ram truck ever built. The brand new 2025 Ram 1500 already has over 130 complaints filed with the Federal Safety Administration, with batteries going dead after 5 or 6 days of sitting in a driveway. The 2013 model year logged 195 electrical complaints. This is not a one-year fluke. This is a pattern across 2 decades of trucks. On the 2006 through 2012 Rams, the TIPM module is usually the culprit. The fuel pump relay inside it fails and can leave the fuel pump running after you shut the truck off, draining the battery and creating a fire risk. A new TIPM from the dealer costs $1,000 to $3,000, though rebuild services handle it for $250 to $500. On the newer 2019 and later trucks, software glitches in the body control module prevent the truck from going to sleep after you lock it. Normal parasitic draw on a Ram is 40 to 70 milliamps. Over 100 milliamps, and your battery will be dead within a week. Once a month, check battery voltage with a cheap multimeter. With the engine off, you want 12.6 volts or higher. Below 12.4 volts means something is pulling power when it should not be. Clean the terminals, hit them with dielectric grease, and after you lock the truck at night, watch for the dashboard lights to go dark within 10 minutes. If that screen stays lit, the truck is not sleeping and the battery is dying overnight. One more quick thing before I let you go. If your Ram has a transfer case, cycle it through all 4 modes once a month, even if you never leave the pavement. The encoder motor and shift fork dry out and seize from sitting in 2-wheel drive for months at a time, and a stuck transfer case is a $1,200 to $2,000 headache you can completely avoid by just turning that dial once a month. That is the real maintenance schedule for a Ram truck, not the one Stellantis prints in the owner's manual to keep the advertised costs down, but the one that actually gets these engines past 200,000 miles. These 8 habits plus that monthly highway drive cost you about $800 to $1,200 a year. The failures they prevent average $5,000 to $8,000 each. Now, if you want to know which Ram mods are actually worth your money and which ones will destroy your engine, I made a whole video on that. 13 Ram mods that are worth it and 5 that kill your engine. That video is on screen right now.